Astor McKinnon had pulled 17 bullets from dying men before she found the one that would change her life forever. The autumn rain hammered against the makeshift hospital windows that October night in 1863, each drop like a musket ball against glass. Astor's hands, stained crimson despite countless washings, trembled as she bent over her newest patient. The man had been dragged in by 2 Union soldiers, his Confederate grave barely visible beneath layers of mud and blood. "Found him in Devil's Creek," one soldier muttered, spitting tobacco juice into a tin cup. "Half dead, but still breathing. You sure you want to waste your time on a reb, Miss McKinnon?" Astor didn't answer. She couldn't. The moment she'd seen his face, sharp cheekbones carved by suffering, dark hair matted with rain and gore, skin pale as winter moonlight, something had shifted in her chest. A recognition she couldn't name, deep as a well and twice as dangerous. "Every man deserves a chance," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm. The stranger's eyes fluttered, open as she began cutting away his uniform. Gray eyes, the color of storm clouds, fixed on her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. His lips moved soundlessly, and she leaned closer, her auburn hair falling like a curtain around them both. "Please," he whispered, and the word carried the weight of a prayer. You can almost smell the desperation in that cramped hospital room. Carbolic acid and unwashed bodies, the metallic tang of blood mixing with the earthy scent of rain. Astor had learned to breathe through her mouth during surgery, but with this man, she found herself drinking in every detail. The way his chest rose and fell in shallow gasps, the network of old scars across his torso telling stories she'd never. "Here, what's your name?" she asked, threading a needle with practiced precision. "GRY." He managed, then winced as she began her work. "GRY Van Bergen." The name rolled off his tongue like honey, touched with an accent she couldn't place. Not quite southern, not quite northern, something in between, like a man caught between 2 worlds. For 3 days, Astor tended him with a devotion that surprised even herself. She spooned broth between his cracked lips, changed his bandages, with the gentle touch of someone handling spun glass, and sat beside his cot during the long watches of the night. Other patients called for her, men missing limbs, boys crying for their mothers, but she found herself returning to GRY's side like a moth to flame. "You're wasting yourself on him," said Margaret O'Brien, the head nurse whose Irish brogue cut through sentiment like a blade. "He's a Johnny Reb, Astor, the enemy." But when Astor looked at GRY, she didn't see an enemy. She saw a man who whispered, "Thank you," after every sip of water, who apologized for bleeding on her dress, who watched her with those storm-gray eyes. As if she were the only thing keeping him tethered to the world. On the 4th morning, she found him sitting up, color returning to his cheeks like dawn creeping across winter fields. He'd managed to comb his dark hair with his fingers, and the transformation was startling. Where before lay a broken soldier, now sat a man who could have stepped from the pages of a romantic novel, all sharp angles and brooding intensity. "You're healing quickly," she observed, checking his wounds with professional detachment that fooled neither of them. "I have something to heal for," he said, and the way he looked at her made her pulse quicken. That afternoon, while GRY slept, Astor made her way to the supply room to gather fresh bandages. The space was cramped, filled with the scent of lavender and lye soap, shelves lined with bottles of laudanum and rolls of cotton. She'd just reached for a tin of carbolic acid when she heard Margaret's voice drifting from the main ward. "Brought the new wanted posters from town. $50 for this one. They say he's killed more Union soldiers than consumption." Astor froze, her hand suspended halfway to the shelf. Through the partially open door, she could see Margaret, holding up a sheet of paper, showing it to the other nurses. The image was crude, a rough sketch in black ink, but the profile was unmistakable. The sharp cheekbones, the dark hair, the aristocratic nose. "They call him the ghost of Shiloh," Margaret continued. "GRY Van Bergen, Confederate spy and assassin. Been hunting him for near 2 years now." The tin of carbolic acid slipped from Astor's nerveless fingers, clattering to the floor like a gunshot. Her vision blurred at the edges, and she had to grip the doorframe to keep from falling. The man she'd nursed back to health, the man who'd looked at her with such gentle gratitude, was one of the most wanted criminals in the Union, she thought. Of his hands, those elegant, long-fingered hands that had accepted her care so gracefully. How many triggers had they pulled? How many Union boys had breathed their last looking into those storm-gray eyes? Miss McKinnon? Margaret's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. Are you quite well? You look as though you've seen a ghost. Astor forced herself to breathe, to smile, to bend and retrieve the fallen tin. Just tired, she managed. Haven't been sleeping well. But as she returned to the ward, her gaze found GRY immediately. He was awake, watching her with those penetrating eyes, and she wondered with a chill that ran bone deep if he could read the knowledge written across her face. Is everything all right? He asked softly as she approached his cot. Astor set down her supplies with hands that barely trembled. Of course, just checking your bandages. But as she unwrapped the cotton from his shoulder, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was tending to a beautiful, dangerous animal, one that might tear her throat out the moment she turned her back. That night, Astor couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow cot in the nurse's quarters, listening to the steady breathing of her roommates while the wanted poster seemed to burn through the wooden box where she'd hidden it beneath her spare aprons. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw GRY's face, both the gentle man who'd whispered, "Thank you," and the cold-eyed killer from the sketch at midnight. She gave up on sleep and made her way to the ward. The hospital was different in the dark. Hours, shadows pooled in corners like spilled ink, and the groans of wounded men created a symphony of suffering that made her skin crawl. She'd grown accustomed to it over the months, but tonight every sound seemed amplified, every shadow pregnant with threat. GRY was awake when she reached his cot, sitting up with his back against the wall. In the dim lamplight, his face was all sharp angles and mysterious hollows, beautiful in a way that made her heart stutter. "Can't sleep either?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Too much on my mind," she admitted, settling into the chair beside his bed. The honest answer surprised her. She'd meant to check his bandages and leave, but something in his eyes held her captive. "Tell me about yourself," he said, shifting to face her more fully. "What brought a woman like you to a place like this?" The question caught her off guard. Most patients asked for water or laudanum, not conversation. A woman like me, beautiful, intelligent, gentle enough to nurse a stranger back to health, yet strong enough to work in a battlefield hospital. His gray eyes studied her face with an intensity that made her cheeks warm. "You could have stayed home, married some merchant's son, lived a comfortable life." Astor found herself smiling despite everything. "My father was a doctor. He always said healing was a calling, not a choice. When the war started, I couldn't sit idle while men died for lack of care. And your family? They supported this calling." Something bitter twisted in her chest. "My father died of typhus 2 years ago. My mother remarried a man who believes a woman's place is in the parlor, not the battlefield. We don't correspond much anymore." GRY's expression softened. "I'm sorry. It's a hard thing, losing the people who understand us." You can almost feel the weight of loneliness settling between them, two souls adrift in a world torn apart by war. But there was something else in the air, something dangerous and electric that made Astor's pulse quicken even as her mind screamed warnings. "What about you?" she asked, then immediately wished she hadn't. What if he told her about the men he'd killed? What if those storm-gray eyes went cold with the memory of blood? But GRY was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. "I had a sister. Once. Anna. She was everything good in the world. Played piano like an angel, made the best apple pie in 3 counties. Never saw a stray cat she didn't feed." His voice grew rough. "She died at Gettysburg. Not from bullets, from the typhus that swept through the refugee camps." "I'm sorry," Astor whispered, and meant it. Pain was pain, regardless of which uniform a man wore. "She was trying to help," he continued. "Nursing the wounded, just like you. The fever took her in 3 days." He looked at Astor then, and she saw something raw and broken in his expression. "That's when I realized that in this war, the good die while the wicked prosper. Sometimes a man has to become something he never wanted to be, just to survive." The words hung between them like a confession, and Astor felt her heart breaking. For him, even as her mind cataloged the implications. Was he trying to justify his actions? Or was he warning her about the kind of man he'd become? "The war has changed us all," she said carefully. "Some more than others. His fingers found hers. In the darkness, and she should have pulled away but couldn't. His touch was gentle, reverent, nothing like the hands of a killer. But not you. You're still fighting for life, still choosing hope over despair. That's rare. For a moment, they sat in comfortable silence, her hand in his, the rest of the world forgotten. Then GRY spoke again, his voice so low she had to lean closer to hear him. Aster, if you ever discovered that someone you cared about had done terrible things, unforgivable things, what would you do? The question hit her like a physical blow. She stared at him, trying to read his expression in the dim light, wondering if he somehow knew that she knew. I suppose, she said slowly, it would depend on why they did those things, and whether they were truly sorry. And if they were, sorry, I mean, if they would give anything to undo the past, to be worthy of someone good. Her throat felt tight. Then I'd hope they would find a way to make amends, to choose a different path. Something shifted in his expression, relief, maybe, or hope. His thumb traced across her knuckles, and she felt herself leaning into his touch despite every rational thought screaming at her to run. You're a remarkable woman, Aster McKinnon, he murmured. And you're a mystery, GRY Van Bergen. The name hung between them, and for a moment she thought she saw something flicker in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or fear. But then he was smiling, that heartbreaking smile that made her forget everything except the way he looked at her. We're all mysteries, I think. The question is whether we're worth solving. Before she could respond, the sound of boots on wooden floors echoed through the ward. Aster snatched her hand back, her heart hammering as she recognized the heavy tread of the night guard making his rounds. I should go, she whispered, standing quickly. Aster. His voice stopped her at the foot of his cot. Whatever happens, I want you to know that these past few days, they've been the best of my life. You've given me something I thought I'd lost forever. What's that? Hope, he said simply. As she hurried back to her quarters, Aster's mind raced. The wanted poster, crinkled in her pocket with each step, a constant reminder of the choice she would have to make. But GRY's words echoed in her head. What would you do if someone you cared about had done terrible things? The terrible truth was, she was already beginning to care about him. And that made everything infinitely more complicated. The next morning brought news that turned Aster's blood to ice water. Colonel Harrison arrived at dawn with a company of soldiers, their blue uniforms crisp despite the October chill. She watched from the hospital window as they set up camp in the courtyard, their movements precise and military. What's all this about? She asked Margaret, who was bustling about with unusual energy. Word came down from headquarters, Margaret said, her Irish accent thick with excitement. They've had reports of Confederate spies in the area. The colonel's here to investigate, and he's brought men to search every building, every person. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. They say the ghost of Shiloh himself might be hiding right under our noses. Aster's hands trembled as she folded a stack of bandages. Surely they wouldn't search a hospital? We're treating wounded men. Wounded men make perfect cover for spies, Margaret replied with a shrug. Besides, the colonel's orders are clear, no exceptions. Every patient, every staff member, every room gets searched. Through the window, Aster could see Colonel Harrison directing his men. He was a tall, lean man with steel-gray hair and eyes like chips of flint. She'd heard stories about him, how he'd hunted down Confederate operatives with the ruthlessness of a predator, how he never gave up once he caught a scent. Her gaze drifted to GRY's cot, where he lay reading a book one of the other nurses had brought him. He looked so peaceful, so ordinary, that she almost wondered if she'd imagined the wanted poster. But then he glanced up and caught her looking, and something in his expression, a flicker of alertness, of calculation, reminded her that beneath the gentle exterior lay a man trained to kill. Miss McKinnon. The voice behind her made her jump. She turned to find a young soldier, barely old enough to shave, holding his cap in his hands. Colonel Harrison wants to see you in the supply room. Aster's heart hammered against her ribs as she followed the soldier down the corridor. The supply room had been transformed into a makeshift interrogation chamber, with Colonel Harrison seated behind a small table covered in papers and maps. His pale eyes fixed on her the moment she entered. Miss McKinnon, he said, gesturing to a chair across from him. Please sit. I have some questions about your patients. She sat carefully, folding her hands in her lap to hide their trembling. Of course, Colonel. I'm happy to help however I can. Tell me about the Confederate soldier who was brought in 4 days ago, he said, consulting a paper in front of him. The one found at Devil's Creek. There have been several Confederate. Wounded, she began, but he cut her off with a wave of his hand. The one with dark hair, gray eyes, goes by the name WWII Van Bergen. The name hung in the air like a noose. Astor forced herself to breathe normally, to keep her voice steady. He was badly wounded when they brought him in. Bullet to the shoulder, several broken ribs, severe blood loss. He's been recovering well. I'm sure he has. Colonel Harrison's smile was sharp as a blade. Tell me, Miss McKinnon, does he ever speak of his past? His unit, perhaps? His commanders? You can almost taste the danger in that cramped room. The scent of leather and gun oil, the weight of unspoken threats. Astor knew she was walking a tightrope, with her own safety and GRY's life hanging in the balance. He rarely speaks at all, she said carefully. Most of our patients are focused on recovery, not conversation about the war. Harrison made a note on his paper. And you've noticed nothing unusual about him? No visitors, no suspicious behavior, nothing at all. He's been a model patient, polite, grateful, cooperative. The colonel leaned back in his chair, studying her with those cold eyes. You know, Miss McKinnon, harboring enemy spies is a serious offense. Treason, in fact, punishable by death. The threat was clear, but Astor met his gaze steadily. I'm aware of the penalties for treason, Colonel. I'm also aware of my duty as a nurse to care for all wounded, regardless of their allegiance. Admirable, he said, though his tone suggested he found it anything but. Very well. You may go. But Miss McKinnon, he stood as she reached the door. I'll be watching. We all will be. When she returned to the ward, Astor found GRY exactly where she'd left him, apparently absorbed in his book. But she noticed the way his eyes tracked her movements, the tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. Everything all right? He asked quietly when she approached his cot. The colonel had some questions about the patients, she said, busying herself with checking his bandages. Routine inquiries. He was quiet for a moment, then. Astor, I need to tell you something. Her hands stilled on the cotton wrapping. What is it? I won't be staying much longer. My wounds are healing well, and I have obligations elsewhere. The words hit her like a physical blow. She'd known this moment would come, but hearing it made everything real in a way that stole her breath. When? Soon. Tonight, perhaps, or tomorrow. His fingers found hers, warm and reassuring. But I want you to know that meeting you has changed. Me. You've reminded me that there's still good in this world, still things worth fighting for. GRY, let me finish. His grip tightened on her hand. I've done things I'm not proud of, things that will haunt me for the rest of my life. But these past few days with you, they've shown me who I want to be, who I could be, if I had the chance. Astor stared at him, her heart breaking. Here was her chance to confront him, to demand the truth about his past, to make him choose between his old life and something new. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she found herself memorizing every detail of his face. The way the afternoon light caught the gold flecks in his gray eyes, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead. What if I asked you to stay? She whispered. Pain flickered across his features. You don't know what you're asking. Then tell me. Help me understand. For a moment, she thought he might confess everything. His lips parted, and she saw the war playing out in his expression, the desire to trust her battling against years of caution and self-preservation. But then the ward door slammed open, and Colonel Harrison strode in with 4 soldiers at his back. His pale eyes swept the room before fixing on GRY with predatory focus. GRY Van Bergen, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the sudden silence. Also known as the Ghost of Shiloh. You're under arrest for espionage, sabotage, and the murder of 17 Union soldiers. The world seemed to freeze. Astor watched in horror as the soldiers surrounded GRY's cot, their rifles trained on him. But he didn't look afraid. If anything, he seemed almost relieved, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. His eyes found hers across the chaos, and in them she saw regret, sorrow, and something that might have been love. The jail cell beneath the courthouse was a tomb of damp stone and despair. Aster pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders as she descended the narrow stairs, her boots echoing against the walls like gunshots. The guard, a grizzled man with tobacco-stained teeth, had taken her $50 and a sob story about needing to retrieve medical supplies from the prisoner. 5 minutes, he'd growled, pocketing the money. And if anyone asks, you were never here. GRY sat on a narrow cot in the corner cell, his wrists shackled to the wall. Someone had beaten him. His left eye was swollen shut, and dried blood crusted his split lip. But when he saw her, his face transformed with an expression of such raw joy and disbelief that her heart nearly stopped. Aster, he breathed. You shouldn't be here. If they catch you, hush. She knelt beside the bars, her fingers reaching through to touch his face. He leaned into her palm like a man dying of thirst. Are you badly hurt? I've had worse. His voice was hoarse, probably from the interrogation. But why did you come? You know what I am now. What I've done. The question hung between them like a blade. Aster had spent the last 2 days wrestling with it, pacing her room like a caged animal while the other nurses whispered about the notorious spy who'd been hiding in their midst. Margaret had been particularly vocal about how lucky they were that he hadn't murdered them all in their sleep. Tell me about the 17 men, she said quietly. GRY's face went rigid. You don't want to hear? Yes, I do. Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled. If I'm going to help you, I need to know everything. He stared at her for a long moment, those storm-gray eyes searching her face. Help me. They're going to execute you at dawn. The colonel made that very clear. So yes, I'm going to help you. But first, I need the truth. All of it. You can almost feel the weight of secrets pressing down on them in that narrow cell, the air thick with the scent of mildew and fear. GRY was quiet for so long that she wondered if he would speak at all. Then, slowly, he began. The 17 men weren't soldiers, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. They were slavers, bounty hunters hired by plantation owners to track down escaped slaves and drag them back to bondage. His hands clenched into fists. They were camping near a farm where my sister and I were hiding. Anna had been helping slaves escape north. It was her passion, her calling. These men, they found her. Aster's blood ran cold. What did they do? They knew she was helping runaways, but they wanted names, locations, the identities of other conductors on the Underground Railroad. His voice cracked. They tortured her for 3 days, trying to break her. Anna never gave them a single name. She died protecting people she'd never even met. The words hit Aster like physical blows. So you killed them. Every last one. There was no remorse in his voice, only a cold satisfaction that made her shiver. I hunted them down one by one, and I made sure they died slowly. The Union branded me a spy and an assassin, but I was really just a brother seeking justice for his sister. And after? You continued working for the Confederacy. GRY's laugh was bitter. I didn't choose sides, Aster. I chose vengeance. The Confederate Army gave me resources, intelligence, opportunities to strike at the men who profited from human suffering. I told myself I was fighting for a cause, but really I was just feeding my own rage. Aster absorbed this, her mind reeling. The man she'd nursed back to health wasn't a mindless killer. He was a grieving brother who'd lost himself in the darkness of revenge. It didn't excuse what he'd done, but it explained it in a way that made her heart ache. Why did you stop? She asked. Because of you. His fingers found hers through the bars. You showed me kindness without expecting anything in return. You saw a wounded man, not a uniform or a reputation. For the first time in 2 years, I remembered what it felt like to be human again. Footsteps echoed in the corridor above, the guard returning from his rounds. Aster knew their time was almost up, but she had one more question. If you could go back, would you do it differently? GRY's eyes closed. I'd save Anna. I'd find another way to stop those men. But I can't change the past, Aster. I can only try to be better moving forward, if I get the chance. You'll get the chance, she said firmly. There's a supply wagon leaving for the front lines at midnight. The driver owes me a favor, and he's willing to take on an extra passenger if the price is right. Aster, no. GRY's voice was sharp with panic. You can't be involved in this. If they catch you helping me escape, they won't catch me. She stood, smoothing her skirts. The guard will find your cell empty in the morning. By then, you'll be 20 miles north, with papers identifying you as a wounded Union soldier being transferred to a hospital in Philadelphia. And what about you? They'll know you helped me. I'll claim ignorance. A poor, delicate nurse who never suspected a thing. She managed to smile. Besides, they have no proof. This is madness. But hope flickered in his eyes. Why would you risk everything? For me? The question she'd been dreading. Astor looked at him. Really looked at him. Taking in the sharp planes of his face, the intelligence in his eyes, the way he held himself even in chains. He was a killer, yes. But he was also a man who'd loved his sister enough to damn himself. For her, who'd wept with gratitude when she'd tended his wounds, who'd made her feel more alive than she'd ever felt in her 23 years. Because everyone deserves a chance at redemption, she said. Even you. The guard's footsteps were getting closer. Astor reached into her medical bag and pulled out a small vial of clear liquid, laudanum, enough to make a man unconscious for several hours. When I give the signal, drink this, she whispered, pressing the vial into his palm. It'll make you appear dead. I'll convince them to let me prepare the body. And then, Miss McKinnon. The guard's voice boomed from the top of the stairs. Time's up. GRY's fingers tightened around hers. If this goes wrong, it won't. But if it does, I want you to know that you saved me long before tonight. You gave me back my soul. The midnight hour struck like a death knell as Astor crept through the shadows toward the courthouse. Her heart hammered against her ribs, each beat so loud she was certain the entire town could hear it. The supply wagon waited at the edge of town, its driver, a scarred veteran named Murphy, already paid and ready to flee at the first sign of trouble. The guard lay slumped over his desk, snoring softly. The bottle of whiskey beside him, laced with enough laudanum to fell a horse, was nearly empty. Astor slipped past him like a ghost, her medical bag clutched tight in her sweating palms. GRY's cell was silent when she reached it, and for one heart-stopping moment, she thought the plan had failed. Then she saw him, motionless on the narrow cot, his chest barely rising and falling. The laudanum had done its work. "Help me," she whispered to the darkness, and began picking the lock with tools borrowed from the hospital's surgical kit. Her father had taught her the skill years ago, claiming a doctor needed to be resourceful. She'd never imagined she'd use it to free a condemned man. The lock clicked open with a sound like breaking bones. Astor eased into the cell, her hands trembling as she checked GRY's pulse. Steady but faint, perfect. She'd calculated the dose carefully, enough to simulate death, but not enough to cause it. "Time to go," she murmured, shaking him gently. "GRY, wake up." His eyes fluttered open, unfocused but aware. "Astor, can you walk?" He struggled to sit up, the laudanum making him clumsy. "I think so. Give me a moment." She helped him to his feet, noting how he swayed like a man drunk on grief. Together they made their way up the stairs, every creaking board sounding like thunder in the silence. The guard didn't stir as they passed his desk, and Astor allowed herself a moment of hope. The night air was cold and sharp, cutting through her cloak like a blade. They moved through the empty streets like wraiths, keeping to the shadows, avoiding the pools of moonlight that could betray them. You can almost taste the fear in the air, metallic and sharp, mixing with the scent of wood smoke and autumn leaves. Murphy was waiting with the wagon, his weathered face grim in the darkness. "Took you long enough," he muttered, helping GRY into the back among the medical supplies. "We need to move fast. Dawn's coming, and once they discover he's gone, they'll have." Every road watched. As the wagon lurched into motion, Astor found herself pressed against GRY's side, his warmth a comfort in the cold night. The laudanum was wearing off, and she could feel the tension returning to his muscles. "This is madness," he said quietly. "You've thrown your life away for me." "I've chosen my life," she corrected. "There's a difference." They rode in silence for what felt like hours, the wagon wheels churning through mud and fallen leaves. Astor dozed fitfully against GRY's shoulder, her dreams filled with hanging ropes and Colonel Harrison's cold eyes. She woke to gunshots. "Soldiers!" Murphy shouted from the driver's seat. "They found us." Through the wagon's canvas cover, Astor could see riders approaching, dark shapes against the gray dawn sky. Colonel Harrison led them, his pale eyes fixed on the wagon with predatory focus. "Stop in the name of the Union," he called out. Murphy whipped the horses harder, But the wagon was heavy and the road treacherous. The soldiers were gaining fast, their mounts fresh and eager. There, GRY said, pointing to a stand of trees ahead. The forest. We can lose them there. They abandoned the wagon at the tree line, Murphy disappearing into the shadows with a muttered curse and a prayer for their souls. Aster and GRY plunged into the woods, branches tearing at their clothes, roots catching at their feet. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew closer. Horses crashing through underbrush, men shouting orders, the bay of hunting dogs. This way, GRY gasped, leading her deeper into the forest. Despite his recent injuries, he moved with the fluid grace of a man who'd spent years evading capture. They reached a clearing where a small stream bubbled over moss-covered stones. GRY stopped suddenly, his hand on Aster's arm. "We can't both make it," he said, his voice heavy with resignation. "They're too close. Don't you dare give up now," Aster hissed. "We're going to—" "No." He turned to face her, cupping her face. In his hands, "Listen to me. There's a cabin about 2 miles north of here, an old hunting lodge. If you can reach it, you'll be safe. The owner is a friend of mine, a man who helps people like us. People like us. People who've chosen love over law." His thumb traced her cheek, and she realized she was crying. "I love you, Aster McKinnon. I've loved you since the moment you chose to save me instead of condemn me." The words hit her like a physical blow. "I love you too. That's why I can't leave you. And I can't let you die for my sins." He pressed his lips to hers, a kiss that tasted of desperation and hope and goodbye. "Live, Aster. Live, and remember that you made me human again." Before she could protest, he was gone, crashing through the underbrush toward the sounds of pursuit. She heard him shouting, drawing the soldiers away from her hiding place, and she knew with terrible certainty that he was sacrificing himself for her freedom. The gunshots came a few minutes later, sharp cracks that echoed through the forest, like breaking hearts. Then silence. Aster found the cabin just as the sun was setting, painting the sky the color of blood and roses. The owner, a grizzled man with kind eyes, took one look at her tear-streaked face and asked no questions. He gave her food, clean clothes, and a place to rest her broken heart. 3 days later, she learned that GRY Van Bergen had been killed while resisting arrest. The newspapers called him a dangerous spy who'd met a fitting end. They never mentioned the nurse who'd loved him or the man who'd chosen redemption over revenge, but Aster knew the truth. She carried it with her when she left that place, when she made her way north to a new life in a new city. She carried it in the way she tended every patient with extra gentleness, in the way she never stopped believing that even the most broken souls could find their way back to the light. Years later, when people asked about the small scar on her left hand, the mark from a rose thorn, she'd say, she would smile and think of a man with storm-gray eyes who'd taught her that sometimes the greatest act of love is letting someone go. The war ended, as all wars do. But love endures, growing wild and beautiful in the places where it's planted, blooming eternal in the soil of sacrifice. So if you enjoyed this tale of love and redemption, be sure to like and subscribe for more stories that'll touch your heart and stir your soul. And speaking of souls, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from today. We love hearing from viewers all around the world.